Reprise du débat, continuing debate. The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be splitting my time with the member for Lethbridge, I believe, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what is going on in the caucuses today is of grave and deep concern. Just over a century after a horrific genocide, the Armenian genocide of 1915-1916, the world still has not learned from the lessons of the past. Just over a century later, we are witnessing a major humanitarian crisis unfold in Nagorno-Karabakh, in the western part of Azerbaijan. Hundreds, tens of thousands, if not over 120,000 civilians are being slowly starved to death in that corridor because of the blockage of that corridor. The former chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Luis Moreno Ocampo, wrote a report recently in which he said, quote, "There is an ongoing genocide against 120,000 Armenians living in Nagorno-Karabakh," end quote. Mr. Speaker, that should raise alarm bells for all of us here in Canada. Canada being a signatory to the 1948 Genocide Convention. Now, many people will think of a genocide as an act of slaughter, a physical slaughter of innocent civilians, but the 1948 Genocide Convention contains many, many other reasons for an event constituting a genocide. It can mean taking away children from a particular group. It can mean destroying the means of life for a particular group, either in part or in whole. And it doesn't necessarily require mass killing. And by blocking the Lachin corridor, the government of Azerbaijan is putting at risk the lives of some 120,000 civilians in Nagorno-Karabakh. They're putting at risk those lives through starvation, a silent killer. Starvation, in many respects, as Mr. Ocampo has written, quote, "Starvation is the invisible genocide weapon. Without immediate dramatic change, this group of Armenians will be destroyed in a few weeks," end quote. This was written just several weeks ago. And should be of great concern to us, Mr. Speaker. The International Court of Justice has ordered Azerbaijan to remove the blockade. Instead, Azerbaijan has established a checkpoint on the road and began even blockading humanitarian aid being delivered by the International Committee of the Red Cross. The BBC has reported that people in Nagorno-Karabakh have been fainting in bread lines. Other witness accounts have shown that people are slowly starving to death. Yet, because of world events, this humanitarian crisis in the Caucasus has gotten little attention. And so, the reason for today's concurrence debate in the House, Mr. Speaker, to draw to the attention of the world the fact that this humanitarian crisis is unfolding and needs to stop. We call on the government of Azerbaijan to immediately reopen the corridor, and not just to humanitarian aid, but also to passenger traffic and also to commercial traffic. And we call on both sides in this conflict, the representatives of the government of Baku and representatives of the community in Stepanakert, to immediately meet to sort out an agreement on transportation that would allow the corridor and other alternative supply routes to reopen, to ensure that food, that medicine, and other goods can flow into the region to ensure that 120,000 people are not slowly starved to death. And Mr. Speaker, I want to finish my speech by delivering a message to both communities involved in this long-standing conflict. Canada was once a country where sectarian violence ruled the politics of the day. It wasn't that long ago, Mr. Speaker, in the 19th century, that various sectarian elements in our society put their sectarian interests and used violence to advance their political causes. It wasn't that long ago, Mr. Speaker, in the mid-19th century, that Protestants and Catholics would be at each other's throats in a violent way, never cooperating on anything, and instead using violence to advance their means, using discrimination, using other forms of non-democratic tools to get their way and to achieve their political ends. And thankfully, Mr. Speaker, through a lot of hard work and dialogue, through constitutional change, through discussions that took place over many, many decades, we were able to leave that terrible time behind. And so too with the linguistic divide that once existed in this country between Anglophones and Francophones. We too ultimately resolved our differences through constitutional change and through legislative changes that endure to this day. And it hasn't always been perfect, as we see with the continued debates on language that are taking place here and at the provincial level. But nevertheless, we have achieved a remarkable degree of social peace and cohesion in this country by moving beyond these sectarian and linguistic divides toward a Canada where people can achieve the good life and that can achieve a resolution to their differences through democratic dialogue and not through the end of a sword. And so too, I hope, is the ultimate result for the peoples living in the South Caucasus in that part of the world. So too, I hope, will be the end result for Armenians living in Azerbaijan and for Azerbaijanis living throughout the region. And so, Mr. Speaker, we call on the Government of Canada to be more categoric and clearer with the international community on the need for Azerbaijan to lift the blockade, to allow the free movement of goods, of people, and of humanitarian aid. We call on the government to be more clear in calling on both parties, those in Stepanakert and those in Baku, to come together to iron out an agreement to allow the free movement of goods, people, and humanitarian aid. And we do that with a sense of urgency, because while this has been going on for some time, this conflict, it has become especially more urgent since Azerbaijan concluded its hostilities against Armenia a couple of years ago. And so I hope, Mr. Speaker, that in this time of conflict with Ukraine, in this time of conflict in other parts of the world, that the world will not turn a blind eye a mere 107 years after another genocide took place in that part of the world. And for all those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I call on the Government of Canada to use its diplomatic resources, to use its influence here and abroad, to deliver a clear message to the Government of Azerbaijan that this blockade of the Lachin corridor is completely unacceptable and that it is leading, in effect, to an ethnic cleansing through the means of a silent killer, starvation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments?